the SEC is going to create a lot of hollering because for competitive balance reasons, I'm sure some people will complain about, but those are going to quickly give way, I think, to the TV ratings. ESPN's going to be like, we're paying you how much money for all this stuff? We're going to get our best teams to play each other pretty much all the time. It's just the exact same thing. Like, would Florida State and Clemson really want to play each other? It kind of adds an extra half loss, per year to whichever team is good at the time.
Right.
Recently, it's been Clemson, and usually those games are kind of blowouts in either direction. But in the SEC, you have a lot of sort of one-sided rivalries, like games where one fan base thinks it's a rivalry and the other fan base is like, whatever. Like, Bama, Arkansas.
Yeah.
Right. Arkansas is like, oh, we're a thorn in Bama's side. And I'm not saying Arkansas is
fair. It's been everybody. No offense, Jordan, but Bama, Tennessee, like for the cigar game, like hadn't been close, but it's a great rivalry and you don't want to lose it. But it's a tricky one.
Auburn is by far the trickiest one here because in the 80s, Auburn, Tennessee was always a big rivalry. In the 90s, Auburn, Florida was always a big rivalry. And that went away after the SEC title game somewhat. And then even more away when you added Texas A&M and Missouri. But if you're Auburn, okay, like the one you're definitely preserving is
Iron Bowl.
All right. Then you have the Deep South's oldest rivalry, which is Auburn, Georgia. So you're keeping that one, I assume. Yep. All right. Then you got, assuming we only have 3 protected games here, are you giving them LSU, Tennessee, Florida, or, I mean, if you're Auburn, do you want that?
Right, because then you talk about a gauntlet.
How big a rival do you really feel these teams are, or do you all of a sudden have a little kindred rivalry with Vandy?
Yeah, definitely. Right, because I mean you're absolutely because and that's where. But do you like? Look, we were talking about Alabama, Tennessee, kind of laughing about it. I mean, there was a time when Tennessee was a powerhouse, and like, do you trust the cyclical nature of college football, or do you try to do it where things stand right now?
I mean, it depends. Like, is Bama going to treat the post-Saban hiring cycle like they did with Bear Bryant, and they just like try to hire anybody who ever knew Nick Saban? Like, if so, then yeah, I think it'll even out. If not, then they have
Jordan, by the way, is chiming in, said, "Who cares about the Bama-Tennessee rival? He wants to do away with it so they can dodge him every year," which is probably the smart thing to do as well.
So, I mean, Tennessee-Georgia is a rivalry that I think Georgia fans would like to keep. I think Tennessee fans would absolutely insist on keeping.
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee, Florida, I think is one that you would want to keep just because over the last
Florida, Georgia, you got to keep.
Florida stays.
Yeah. That's probably like they're at the priority ranking. It's got to be Iron Bowl. It's got to be Florida, Georgia, Alabama-LSU.
See, that's one. It's like it's a recent rivalry, though.
Right?
Like it wasn't anything in the 90s. It really wasn't anything in like the aughts. It's just like the last 10 years,
right?
Basically,
when it was the game of the year, which if you lost, like you'd replace it with something else easily. Right. And then you schedule them then I think there is an aspect of it. If it's not a long-standing historical rivalry, when you do come back to it, man, it adds a lot of juice to it.
I agree.
Some
of these are more difficult to figure out.
Egg Bowl, that's a good one. Jordan said, that's one I think you have to like the state rivals. I think you have to maintain those.
We need Texas and A&M, right?
Oh yeah,
like what we let you in we let you in Texas, we let you in A&M.
Right,
you guys are playing.
Absolutely, you got to do what's best for the conference at that point.
Oklahoma, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma.
Yeah, who's the other one? But again, do you throw them I don't want to say a cakewalk because there aren't many cakewalks in there.
I don't think if you're getting Texas and Arkansas for Oklahoma, I don't think you need a cakewalk. Like that's probably the 5th best and 12th best team in that league. Like,
yeah,
Auburn needs a cakewalk. I mean, I might give Oklahoma like I don't know. I guess do we count Kentucky as a cakewalk? Probably not. I mean, historically, yes. Currently, probably no.
But I still think that would be considered easier out of these opponents. Mississippi State, I still think would be considered an easier opponent. I know that, and then both of them had great years. And I think what do you do with Ole Miss? I mean, I think they're historically. It depends on what part of history you're talking about, but I would say, be an easier opponent. I know they're coming off an incredible season, but I just
Egg Bowl, LSU, and
for Ole Miss.
I think so.
Yeah. And who else?
I don't know. Like this is another one. Like LSU Arkansas is traditionally a day after Thanksgiving game for most of our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Do you keep that? Like this is there's going to be some horse trading going on.
Yeah.
In Destin, man.
Yeah, they are. I love this.
I mean, you put Vandy with Ole Miss? Like they're the annual rival right now, but I mean, feels like one of those forced rivals.
Vandy, Tennessee, but then you take away from one of Tennessee, like just as a regional?
Jordan arguing for Vandy, Tennessee?
I don't know, but I would if I was him. But I mean, there's some of these like
OU Missouri regional? Could work. He is right about that. They used to be conference opponents.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a little bit of a breather as well. But I mean, shoot, when they came in, they made back-to-back championship games. That's why I wonder if you just like at some point, Greg Sankey's got to say, look, we're rolling with this. You guys can complain and you guys will forget about this in 2 years, although they won't forget about it ever. It depends on like how we're even determining a national champion. Who knows how that'll be,
Right. Exactly. Who do you think is the big winner in this SEC wise? Or is there an obvious
like Mizzou? What about Mizzou? Like who do you pair with Mizzou? Like I think some of these programs like a Mizzou might be the big winner because, like it's just, who are you going to pair them with? Kentucky, South Carolina might be a big, like who do you pair South Carolina with? So some of these teams that don't have, in-state long-held rivalries and you kind of get the leftovers of the regular season matchups.
See, this is a perfect one, Danny. Exactly. This encapsulates the one fan base thinks it's a rivalry. The other fan base does not, more than almost any school out there. South Carolina, Florida is not a rivalry for Florida. Right. It is for South Carolina. South Carolina, Tennessee, I don't really think is a rivalry for Tennessee. It probably is for South Carolina. South Carolina, Georgia, same thing. Georgia fans don't consider South Carolina a rival. They consider them like an occasional annoyance, So South Carolina's gonna be like, we want this team, we want that team. What might end up happening is like you give Georgia Auburn, you give Georgia Florida, and you give Georgia South Carolina because South Carolina needs to feel like they have a rival, and Georgia's like, we want a breather.
Right.
Yeah.
And
then you keep Tennessee, Florida. Do you stick Florida with LSU, Georgia, Tennessee? Like that's kind of tough.
Kinda.
I mean, assuming Tennessee can get its act together for like
but they're trending in the right direction. And there was a time when, Tennessee was, again, like you go back 20 years, Tennessee was good. Like it's not there. They got this collective going. They want to be big.
Tennessee wants to be good. Yeah, like they're not screwing around.
They got the want to. They got the desire. Now they got the finances. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
I think the biggest losers are like, it's probably like a South Carolina, Missouri, because they're not getting like the chance that they get to play like Kentucky. Like every year, Missouri gets Vandy, Kentucky, South Carolina, and the reverse for South Carolina. Like now, the chance that they get to play like 3 of the bottom 5 every year is reduced.
Is there any doubt that even when we're discussing these pods, the schedules will get harder in the SEC? Because if you've been an East team, you've had, and you get lucky on the crossover games, like you can because even Georgia's schedule last year, Georgia's schedule this year, it doesn't look like it's that much of a gauntlet, but all of a sudden, if you start creating and pairing some of these East teams, like you're not going to be able to dodge some of these teams in the West. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting because I think the schedule that we always thought was tough is going to get even tougher if they go to pods.
I think you're right. Like on average, the East teams will have tougher schedules, and like the West teams, like Auburn could have a much easier schedule on average.
Mm-hmm.
There's some years in which Auburn has to play Georgia, Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, A&M, and then Florida. Right, like that's kind of tough for the Tigers. You can be a really good team, like you could be a top 15 power rated team and go 7-5. Which is a couple bad breaks there.
Yep.
But yeah, that is really tough. Chat section here saying the live commenters, if the SEC kept divisions, you would have to send Bama and Auburn to the East, would be really uneven. Yeah, I don't think they're going to keep divisions at this point. Like they're not going to have 9 team divisions. That'd be kind of crazy.
Right. It's almost a definite. And then we're doing away with divisions, right?
Yeah.